So let me get some things out of the way before we get into the video. If you are not looking to improve as an artist and you like the way your art looks, chicken scratch or not, that's great. I'm not here to tell people that are content with their art to change the way they operate. I'm simply here to state my opinions on the matter and clear some misconceptions up, as well as my general philosophy on what makes art good. So what is chicken scratch? Well, first, let's go over what isn't chicken scratch, as many people call many other art techniques chicken scratching. For example, hatching, cross-hatching, and other line-based shading techniques are not chicken scratching. Searching lines is when you do repeated light strokes before committing to a line, also not chicken scratching. Repeating lines on top of each other to add line thickness and variety is also not chicken scratching. The only thing chicken scratching is when instead of making a long continuous line, straight or curved that is, you achieve the same line by making repeated smaller strokes. However, it seems that whenever I see videos going over what chicken scratching is, they often say or imply that it has to look unpolished and or bad. Although I do think it's mostly due to its name that it's viewed with a negative connotation, I think that if the quality of chicken scratch causes it to change from one technique to another, then we need to revise our definition. The execution of a technique should not change which technique is being used. That is silly and misleading. Plus, I don't think chicken scratching deserves all the hate anyways.
Is it just me that gets frustrated with TikTok artists that don't know the difference between chicken scratch and an art style involving a scratchy and messy look?
The difference between chicken scratch and a messy art style is that chicken scratch is an art technique, and an art style is what your art looks like regardless of how you got there. So you could get a messy art style by chicken scratching or other means.
Like, bro. Chicken scratching is a beginner's mistake and it's not supposed to be on purpose, hence why it's considered bad.
While chicken scratching is a mistake if you are not meaning to chicken scratch, beginner or not, it's considered bad purely on preference. There is nothing objectively bad about chicken scratch lines.
If you're doing it on purpose, it's not chicken scratching. It's an art style preference.
If you're doing it on purpose, it is chicken scratching, because chicken scratching is a replicable art technique. If throughout this video you have been yelling at your screen telling me it's not an art technique, here's why it is. Look it up and you will find over and over that an art technique is any process that one may take to achieve a desired result. So yes, chicken scratching, whether done on purpose or not, is an art technique. You can have a chicken scratchy art style just like you can have a sketchy art style, but those terms are simply used as a reference to describe an art style. It doesn't take away from the fact that sketching is an art technique or that chicken scratching is an art technique. While one may describe a broader process/thing than another, both are art techniques by definition.
Just because it's sketchy, scratchy, and messy doesn't mean it's chicken scratch.
True, I would agree with you there. You would have to specifically construct longer lines with shorter rapid lines in order for it to be considered chicken scratch.
Chicken scratching is considered a beginner's mistake because most beginners do it, and it shows their lack of line confidence, which is why it's wiggly, messy, unconnected lines and it looks bad.
You're right that it's considered a beginner mistake because most beginners do it. I would say that's where it gets most of its bad rep. Although some of the things you stated aren't required for chicken scratch. It gets its name because originally people compared that kind of line work to what literal chicken scratching on a wall looks like. But as time has gone by, the way people use the term has also changed. That's why I decided on my personal definition of chicken scratching. Because without using this definition and going more by the spirit of how the phrase was originally used, then a bunch of other ways of drawing could also be called chicken scratching, which I think is a reason for a lot of the confusion with hatching, cross-hatching, and general sketching, as in certain scenarios, they do fit that kind of look of literal chicken scratching on a wall. Yet these aren't chicken scratching obviously, so while using my definition of the term may not always result to referring to art that looks like literal chicken scratch, us being able to know exactly what we're referring to would be very helpful for both art discussion and education. Besides, we have plenty of other technique names that aren't 100% accurate to what the product ends up looking like.
If you're doing it on purpose, a scratchy line art and still making a good drawing, it's not chicken scratch.
I already went over this. If you're specifically doing chicken scratching in its art technique sense, it's still chicken scratching.
Chicken scratching is what makes drawings look bad.
The term look bad is purely subjective here.
It's not one stroke of line, it's multiple lines creating one.
We actually agree here, and this common sentiment is why I decided on my personal definition. While following the statement may not always result in what looks like literal chicken scratch, most agree with it, and now we can clarify if we are referring to the technique or a chicken scratchy look.
But of course, you can't mistake it to hatching, cross-hatching, rough sketch, and texture line art because all of those are intentional.
You can't mistake them to each other because all of those are different art techniques, not because they are intentional. I will get to how intent affects chicken scratching later in the video, so don't worry if you want me to address that.
Having a messy art style that's scratchy in texture is okay, but don't call it chicken scratching.
True, art style does not equal technique.
Because it's not chicken scratching if it's on purpose. Stop justifying your terrible chicken scratching as an art style. Stop justifying it because beginner artists won't be able to be confident in their strokes. Many professional artists will agree that chicken scratching is bad.
So I think what they're trying to get at, and are either failing to communicate or are themselves a little confused on, is that chicken scratching is bad when they are the only kinds of lines you can do. And it's why professionals tells you not to do them, because you should be able to draw lines with or without chicken scratch, and over relying on chicken scratch is the bad habit everyone keeps talking about, which I'll go into later.
Those justifying it either has never seen chicken scratch, not an artist, or has only seen the chicken scratch of TikTok, which, again, isn't chicken scratching.
True, I will say that TikTok has a bad habit of calling anything that heavily uses something an art style, like the hatching style or the chicken scratch style. Usually, styles get their name from the people who are iconic for creating/using them, because art styles tend to be very specific to an individual, and are made up of hundreds of techniques, not just one. It seems like as the internet has become bigger with artists having easier access to other works and copying them, to be blunt, along with art being adjacent to fashion, who names things differently, it's causing newer modern art styles to be named around the things that it kind of looks like, rather than a person's name. For example, correct me if I'm wrong, but the jelly art style has its name because certain aspects of how this style depicts people are reminiscent of jelly.
Stop it, it makes you sound incredibly stupid and annoying. You will sound like a moron. Anyway, enjoy the rest of the speed paint.
Okay, next TikTok.
Chicken scratching isn't a bad way to draw. There is no single best way to do art and all techniques are valid.
See, this girl gets it.
Why it may look bad is because oftentimes beginner artists who chicken scratch hyperfixate on the line that they are extending, instead of focusing on the whole drawing and how that line fits in. That's a fundamental issue and not the technique.
Also true.
Let's not put down other artists anymore.
Great video, no notes. Let's move on to some comments of both the TikTok we've just viewed and other ones that I didn't think were interesting enough to show, but I thought the comments were interesting. I think it's great if you like it, no notes. I also agree, if you are looking to improve and be the best artist you can, you should improve your line quality. There seems to be a pushback and a plugging your ears and singing kind of response to people who do enjoy chicken scratch, which seems really counterproductive, but I get it if you're just drawing for fun. Chicken scratch hate has been around for a while. I wouldn't say the hate, but more so the advice to avoid it, which generally is good advice. The hate is more modern. This one is a screenshot, but I found the sentiment pretty accurate, so I just wanted to share it. This one is also a video screenshot, but I found it interesting because they are contradicting themselves right in the picture. They intentionally use chicken scratch, yet said that if it's intentional, then it's not chicken scratching, which is a bit of a paradox. Here's why. The hand motion of chicken scratching is applicable to other techniques. For example, let's look at comic penciler and line artist David Finch. When you see him cross-hatch, you'll notice that due to both his tool and his personal habits, he builds up those hatching lines by doing chicken scratch motions. Now you might be saying, he may be doing chicken scratch-like motions, but it's still not chicken scratch, it's hatching. And you would be right. Both the look of an art technique and how you achieve that look are what contribute to it being a technique, and what differentiates it from other art techniques. But the point I'm trying to illustrate here is that chicken scratching is not completely useless. For beginners, it's an easy-to-do, beginner-friendly technique that, if honed and executed with patience, can lead to some actually good-looking results. Just look at Jay Marin, a TikTok artist. By our previously stated definition, when he sketches, he mostly chicken scratches. Pay attention to how he slowly inches forward on each line. However, because he is skilled and patient with those pencil strokes, the end result is not what we typically associate with chicken scratch. Although, because it is such a beginner thing to do, we associate negatively with lacking skill, which is partially valid. Now, am I saying beginners should stick with chicken scratch and not bother learning how to execute different kinds of lines? Absolutely not, and that would bring us to our next chapter. In order to understand that despite defending it earlier, I still think you should avoid it and learn other ways to draw lines, I have to talk about my philosophy on what makes art good, or the term I prefer using, successful. I use the term successful because what looks good and bad is subjective. Show an art piece to two random people and they could have two different opinions on it, and it says nothing about the art itself. What makes art successful is artist's intent, and if that intent was communicated to the audience. Artist's intent is one of the only ways we have to objectively critique art. An artist knows both what they wanted the product to be and the message they wanted to communicate. There is no, it's just my style, because you either wanted it to be the way it turned out or not. The artist knows truly in their heart of hearts if they actually purposefully drew the eyes like that, or if it's the only way they could have drawn the eyes. You get the gist. Now, this doesn't mean art can't be vague or have confusing meanings, because the artist could have intended it to be that way. To create discussion and passionate discourse about its true meaning, if you can make your audience do that, I consider it a success. Now, does every work of art that does that succeed? Also no. If the audience is confused and arguing amongst themselves on the meaning behind your creation, when you intended it to have a clear takeaway, then that art, in my opinion, from the artist's perspective, was unsuccessful. But it also doesn't make the art bad. This is where the death of the author concept comes into play, where a piece of media or art originally made to have one message, over time gets interpreted as having a different message, despite the author's intent. Also, a lot of creations that have this happen to them are still critically acclaimed to this day, so I wouldn't call it bad art, just unsuccessful on the artist side, as they were not able to do what they wanted to with their creation. Okay, so I've explained my philosophy on what makes art successful, but how does this relate to the whole chicken scratching discourse? It's simple. Chicken scratching will always be an acceptable, understandable thing for a beginner artist to do. But in order for it to be a positive aspect to your art, it has to be a decision to include it. To elaborate on that, by practicing being able to draw other kinds of lines, it becomes a choice. You are using chicken scratch with intent. That is what's important. So you have to be honest with yourself. If you wanted to draw with a really clean art style, could you do it? If not, then you should be practicing improving your line quality and technique. I'm not saying you should never do any artwork that includes chicken scratch until you can draw perfect lines or anything like that. All I'm saying is that being able to draw what you want, how you want to, feels awesome. And having all those options, but being able to choose what works best for your art pieces is what makes an artist great. In my opinion, at least. That standard is what I'm always pushing towards, and the North Star that keeps me on the right track with my art. Well, first and foremost, don't try to give an artist advice if they are not asking for it. It's generally seen as rude. Secondly, let's be like Thumper. If you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all. Do not shit on artists that use chicken scratch for their art just because it's not your personal flavor. It goes both ways too. I see way too many people showing off their art progression, going from a messier art style to a cleaner one, and people in the comments are saying things like soul to soulless or bro went backwards. 1. If art is made by an individual human, it can't be soulless. There's at least a little soul in there. 2. Who are you to say whether someone's art progressed or not? You're not nearly qualified enough to make that call. Anyways, thirdly, if you see an art tutorial telling you to stop chicken scratching, don't take personal offense. They are not trying to insult you or call your art bad. They are simply giving out general advice that you can take or leave. Giving people the benefit of the doubt goes a long way, and it'll make you happier in the end. That's all I had to say. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you learned something or got a fresh perspective on things. If you disagreed, that's fine. Let me know how though. I'd love to see other people's takes on this. If you liked the video, you know what to do. See ya.